But you know, I'm here to introduce someone who's more than just the former Assistant Secretary of Interior, someone who I worked with closely, worked in my office when I was in Washington, D.C., and we worked together over on a number of issues over the course of the succeeding decades. And he brings to, there's a number of qualities that he has. One is he's very direct and he's very energetic, and he has a streak of tenacity in him that is able to get things done. And he also has a unique eye on political issues, and he helped, he helped my office become very successful. And I credit him with a lot of the work that we did. Some of the things, of course, some were very serious things. He worked on issues related to political status development. We worked on issues related to land issues for Guam. He also was able to engineer bringing Mariah Carey to Guam. That was a really big deal. Everyone remembers that. Nobody remembers return of excess lands, but when you say, hey, remember when Mariah Carey came to Guam? Yeah, I remember that. Well, that was Tony Babauta's work. And so over the course of his, he left my office and he went to work for the committee, the Committee on Resources, and he started to take on issues there, and he was extremely helpful because in the way that policy issues are decided in Washington, D.C., it's one thing to work in a congressional office, it's another thing yet to work in a committee office because they navigate, they can give you insight into which pieces of legislation are moving. They can tell you whether your legislation is alive or dead or barely breathing. And, you would tell them, oh, no, boss, that's not going to go anywhere. I can tell the other members are not going to go for it. I don't think Mr. Miller likes it, or whatever, But that was very helpful. And then, of course, eventually he became Assistant Secretary in the Obama administration. And again, that gave us another level of insight, gave us a lot of things that he tried to help the island as much as he could within the context of a broader agenda that he had to carry out. And so it's with really great pleasure and honor to introduce him. He has many fine qualities, as I mentioned. He's from Agate. He's another fine quality. And
why are you laughing?
What's wrong with being from Agate? And he's also the reigning Mr. Democrat. They used to have these contests inside the Democratic Party where you had Miss Democrat and you had Mr. Democrat. Well, they continued to have the Miss Democrat contest, and so there's been a whole series of Miss Democrats since then, but no one, after Tony became Mr. Democrat, they never had another Mr. Democrat. So I present to you the Honorable Anthony M.
On behalf of the University of Guam and its students, we'd like to present you with this today.
Thank you.
That's what one agate boy to another.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to have someone as distinguished as Robert Underwood introduce you. I had a great time working with him in his office. There wasn't a moment where, as serious as our issues were that we were pursuing, that we didn't find some humor in some of the things that we're doing. You have to do that sometimes in Washington just to maintain a certain level of sanity in that environment. But good afternoon, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you, and most especially here, of course, at the University of Guam. I'm very grateful to President Underwood for the invitation to be the keynote for this presidential lecture series. I do recall that when the University of Mr. Underwood began this forum, and I'm honored to now share in the company of those who have not only participated, but who have imparted their knowledge, their experience, their reflections, and their life lessons to the university's academic community. This is actually my second time to participate in this forum. The first was as an observer 2 years ago when John DeYoung, the governor of the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, visited Guam. Governor DeYoung had already become a close friend of mine, and knowing the challenges and successes which he faced as the U.S. Virgin Islands chief executive, his visit was one which I really encouraged. Governor DeYoung couldn't have been more excited to visit Guam and share his experiences, the commonalities and differences as another U.S. territory. As we all know, events like this, presidential lecture series, just doesn't happen. It takes considerable effort by many here at the university, and I'd just like to ask all of those who are here and responsible for putting this thing together, just to stand up and so we can all just acknowledge you and applaud your effort in putting this together. During my tenure here, as Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Insular Areas, I've spoken at many different events, and as any mindful presenter or lecturer, you always try to thank those who put their time and dedication into making the event possible. So I'd like to also ask for everyone's indulgence while I just take a brief moment to publicly thank my parents yet once again, Tony and Mary, for not simply trekking their way from Agate here to Lima to see me, but for their unwavering support for me, whether I was sharing any news of my success, the veins of my frustrations, or the depths of my sadness, both professional and personal. I always know that I can count on you and your presence and your prayers. So please know, Mom and Dad, I love you very much. Many know that since departing from my office, I continue to live in Washington, D.C. as I have been for the past 15 years. But I still refuse to call our nation's capital home. Home is where your heart is. And I know that for a fact my heart is a minimum 98.5 degrees. And when the doors of United's Flights 201 swing open, and the first wave of warmth and humidity rush out the jetway into the airplane and engulf me, I know that I'm home. So my heart has once again been reunited with home, and I'm certainly glad to be back. I have a goal this afternoon of giving you a better sense of exactly what I did in Washington, D.C., having worked in Congress for Mr. Underwood and later for the Committee on Natural Resources in the House of Representatives. And then, of course, my tenure as Assistant Secretary of the Interior during the Obama administration. Early on in the Obama administration, my short response to the question of what is it exactly that you do was always, you know how Congress passes laws that affect the U.S. territories? And the person nods their head, it's like you nodding your head. Thanks. So I'd say, now I'm responsible, because I had a part in it, I'm responsible for implementing all those laws and making them work for our constituents in our insular areas. It was a simple enough notion. After all, I was part of a congressional brain trust who sat with members of Congress for 12 years, writing legislation, putting together the hearings, writing briefing memos, laying out the arguments, ushering a bill through the committee to the House floor, and then encouraging the U.S. Senate to not touch our carefully crafted legislation. Our message to the Senate was always, you don't need to think about this too much or for too long. We've already done all the heavy lifting, boss, you know what I'm talking about. So just pass it and send it along to the president for his signature. That's all we wanted the Senate to do. It's a process that's much easier explained than actually carried out. But we went about it like this each and every time. Consistency and dogged tenacity are lessons that served me well then, and which will take me to even bigger places later. For those who have ever taken an interest in the legislative process, or watched Schoolhouse Rock's I'm Just a Bill, the process I described should sound somewhat familiar. Some may also recall Otto von Bismarck's remark that laws are like sausage. You don't want to see it being made. Legislation, however, for our insular areas, in my opinion, is a bit different. I think it's more like making fried rice. And this is your first glimpse of an Agate boy's perspective. I can only speak for my village and for my family, but when we make fried rice, it's a combination of some old and some new. take white rice from the night before and our leftover steak or chicken or whatever protein wasn't finished at dinner. A new can of Spam, fresh onions, garlic, soy sauce, eggs. We fry it all together, and breakfast or lunch or even dinner is then served. And insular legislation is very similar. What has the Congress not acted on? What are our historical leftovers? War reparations, return of excess lands, political status. And then there are new issues that need to be addressed as well. And all of them, old and new, be put into one legislative vehicle, perhaps a walk, and mixed together to make a delicious dish worthy of congressional action. If you ever see news reports about Congress considering HR such and such, sometimes or almost always known as an omnibus territories bill, that's what our fried rice is. Despite my analogy of simply making fried rice, the process, although not a bad one, is very complex. It factors in the strength of one's argument, the ability to read and understand where others may disagree with you on your issue, and how you respond to those objections, and how you build interest and consensus for your legislation. We know that Guam's sons and daughters serve in the military on a higher per capita basis than the majority of any other U.S. jurisdiction in the United States. But that argument alone, though significant, does not serve as a rationale which allows every Guam issue or bill to move forward through the process. No matter how good, sensible, or delicious your fried rice looks and tastes, someone may not like your Spam or your onions. And in this case, like Bill in Schoolhouse Rock, the process starts all over again. Yet we remain hopeful that persistence, reason, and hard work along with legislative opportunities will always allow us to get a bill passed. I recall a time when I was no longer working for Mr. Underwood, and I had already moved on to the Natural Resources Committee as a professional staff member. I was still responsible for territorial issues, and at this time we were moving legislation to establish the Guam War Claims Review Commission. And keep in mind now that the effort thus far to seek equity and fairness for our people who had endured Japanese occupation was already championed by delegates Antonio Wampat and also Ben Blas without success. So the approach that we undertook was to write legislation which would establish the commissions and panel fair people to review the historical record of Guam's treatment when it came to reparations and to compare that treatment against similar laws that were passed which addressed claims resulting from World War II. We had moved the bill through the committee's process, and Congress was now taking it up for consideration on the House floor. Another one of Congressman Underwood's staff joined both him and me for the House's consideration and the debate on the bill. And at one point, Mr. Underwood turned to both of us, and the other staffer was a young woman from Jotnya, Ginny Nutter, and he said, "Can you believe this? Here we are passing legislation in the House of Representatives for Guam, and there are 3 Chamorros on the House floor. When do you think something like that will ever happen again?" And the reason why the moment is so special and will forever stand out in my mind was because the House floor has restricted access. Typically, a member of Congress can only bring one of his or her personal staff to the floor when that member's bill is under consideration. The other restriction is that apart from the members and the one staffer, the only other staff allowed on the floor are professional staff or committee staff. So needless to say, it was a special occasion for Guam. Because there hasn't been too many instances where the committee or a committee in Congress, no matter which chamber, has a Chamorro on board. And so for this reason, and it was for this reason that Jolnya, Windward Hills, and Agate was represented on the floor that day and was literally in the House. Access is one of the keys to getting things done in the nation's capital. And getting beyond office gatekeepers to meet with a member or staff is always a part of the legislative process. As a member of the committee's professional staff, access was somewhat easier to come by for me, but I soon discovered that building relationships with members of Congress and other staff colleagues would not only personally valuable but important to establish professional trust among your peers and to get things done. Nowadays, we hear and know the environment in Congress. It's extreme partisanship, and not just between Democrats and Republicans, but within the political parties themselves as well, and most especially, of course, within the GOP. From the outside looking in, the extremism extends beyond the principles, and even staff now have difficulty speaking to one another. I still have many friends on Capitol Hill, but the days of old when you could disagree and still work on finding common ground are gone, are a thing of the past. For example, according to some statistics, the last Congress was considered one of the most unproductive Congresses in the history of the country. And a comparison was made that the Congress had only passed 26 bills which were sent to the President for signature. In the previous Congress, covering the same time period, the average numbers of bills passed was around 200. So during my time on the Hill, we could be partisan, but still understand and agree that issues need to move forward for the better of the country and also for our insular areas, and that building relationships, respect, and understanding was key. One example in particular stands out and continues to pay dividends to this day. It was in 2006 where I led a staff bell as a staff delegation, which traveled to Japan, Guam, and the Northern Marianas. In addition to my Republican counterpart on the committee, I invited professional staff from the Finance Committee, from the Judiciary Committee, and also from the Armed Services Committee. Our focus was the relocation of Marines to Guam and also extending U.S. immigration laws to the Northern Marianas. It was this trip that set the groundwork for the Natural Resources Committee to be the first congressional committee to hold a hearing on the Guam buildup, and equally important, the trip was used to educate my colleagues of the predicament in the Northern Marianas, that border was one which needed additional protections by having U.S. immigration laws applied to that territory. In addition, we still wanted to demonstrate that the Marianas Archipelago was still a secure region, and that because of existing security measures, there was no compelling considerations which substantively prevented a new program to help expand the Marianas' access to new tourism markets. Remember now that this is a post-9/11 era, and keeping our borders secure was paramount for me. So having the ability to work with my colleagues, especially those who seemingly had a hardline stance against making it easier for some to enter our country, was important to our success. We had begun laying the groundwork to increase tourism, knowing that China and Russia were fast becoming emerging markets. So in the year or two which followed, we worked tirelessly with the administration, with local leaders, Congresswoman Verdallo, and across party lines to craft a bill that we thought would set good policy to secure our borders, yet still move the island's economies forward. It took us nearly 2 years, several congressional hearings, and hundreds of hours of writing and rewriting, negotiating and renegotiating, to finally put a bill together that garnered enough support and made stakeholders feel comfortable with the direction in which we needed to pursue. And in normalizing the immigration laws in the Northern Marianas, we also included a new program which renamed the existing Guam Visa Waiver Program to include the Northern Marianas. And we included language which kept the doors of opportunity open to Russia and Chinese visitors. So the question becomes, and sometimes this is a difficult one to raise because it's a pat on my back, and I'm from Hackett, we're humble people. But the question becomes, would this issue even begun had there not been someone from Guam or from our region who had the fortune of leading and sensitizing a small group of very influential congressional staffers to our islands? Would we have the access we now have to those new tourism markets? Or would one of the committees assert jurisdiction over that legislation because they didn't like our spam, or they didn't like our onions, which was our Russia and our China language? I wonder sometimes how much of a difference I made during my time as a congressional staffer, and did I make a large impact? Would the compacts of free association between the U.S. and the Marshalls, FSM, and Palau be fundamentally different? Those relationships are not perfect, but they are better. But are they better? Because I was a part of that process. Would we even be getting $30 million per year in compact impact funding, knowing that the Bush administration, in its negotiation, only recommended $7 million in compact impact aid? When I resigned from my position as Assistant Secretary, I said publicly that I have had a storied career as a public servant and that I have taken great pleasure in being able to work to improve the lives of our fellow Americans living in U.S. territories. It was one of the sincerest statements that I could have ever made, and I wouldn't have been able to do so had I not been privileged to hold my office and develop an agenda that I thought was important for progress. Law can be considered policy, but not all policy is law. Policy is actually defined as simply, quote unquote, a course of action. And so when I assumed office as Assistant Secretary, my responsibility to the country and to the constituency of insular areas was to implement the laws which had been passed by Congress. The laws, however, didn't seem to micromanage my actions. They did provide boundaries, and within those boundaries was the ability to set policy, to establish an agenda for a course of action. Everyone knows that I'm a proud Islander, and it was my hope to be able to leave without forgetting where I came from. I think I was once quoted as saying, "I'm just a boy from a tiny village on a small island. I'm just a boy from a tiny village on a small island in the big ocean." I always try to remember that, hoping that it, along with the values instilled into me by my family and my political mentors, would help guide my work. And I wanted to lead by strengthening relationships, building coalitions, empowering island leaders and their constituents with transparent information. I wanted to support education for students and for the workforce, and I wanted to help preserve our respective and unique cultures and languages. I wanted to leave my office so that whomever came after me knew that an islander had just occupied the chair. As a Democrat, I believed in the president's agenda as well, and since he was ultimately my boss and an islander himself, I did all that I could to apply his vision for the country to our insular areas. So my office pursued several initiatives, and if you didn't think my islander roots helped influence what I named them, all you need to do is take a close listen. The Insular Plan for Alternative and Renewable Energy, IPAIR to non-Chamorro speakers, IPARI to those who actually speak or understand Chamorro. IPARI is a successful, comprehensive effort which has resulted in each U.S. Pacific territory adopting a plan to reduce fossil fuel consumption and increase efficiencies and the integration of renewable and indigenous alternative fuel sources. As many of you know, Guam is now well on its way to diversifying its energy sources by implementing both solar and wind, as well as educating the public about energy efficiency. Pacific Island leaders addressing compact impact. Whether you speak Chamorro or not, this acronym is going to cause you to say relax. No doubt about it. Bringing together the chief executives from all the U.S. Pacific territories, the freely associated states, and also the state of Hawaii, a first-time gathering for all these leaders to discuss and work towards a regional solutions at addressing the migration of FAS citizens and the impact that they have on U.S. jurisdictions. Insular assessment of building and classrooms, or Insular ABCs. There's actually no Chamorro. It was initiated in 2010, and Insular ABCs was created to conduct a baseline inventory and deferred maintenance assessment of the 125 public elementary, middle, and high schools comprising of approximately 1,600 buildings in all U.S. territories, with the exception of Puerto Rico. I'm particularly proud of this initiative because it empowers everyone, leaders and constituents alike, with information on the physical condition of our schools. Here in Guam, just over this past month, the report's findings have stirred up Simon Sanchez parents and students to demand improvements to their school. And to that, I say, good for them, because we should all demand better and responsive government. Economic data for insular areas. Remember, much more now. My office entered into an interagency agreement with the U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Economic Analysis to establish a program from within the BEA that would report on insular economic data. The collection and reporting of the data is analyzed using the same or similar metrics as you would in any state, and is the first reporting by the BEA of any U.S. territory in the history of the nation. Just last week, the BEA reported that Guam has had positive economic growth, and it's this type of data that will assist your local leaders, our local leaders, to maintain the policies which support existing industry, but more importantly, identify the weaknesses which need strengthening. My policy of supporting education has resulted in improvements at Guam Community College's newest buildings on campus, funding to assist Guam's teachers purchase supplies for their classrooms and students, and here at the University of Guam, we stood up the Green Army, provided seed money for the design of the future engineering school, we repaired the field house, and we launched a UOG led by local initiative. Aside from the major policy initiatives which my office pursued, I also maximized the flexibility of the Assistant Secretary's office when it came to Guam and all other jurisdictions to increase and focus federal funding to improve water and wastewater systems, to ensure the availability of emergency vehicles and equipment to provide for safer communities. We invested in education. We increased training for public employees. We encouraged and increased private sector employment of CNMI residents. We funded the construction of the first and only American Samoa fale built on local government land to preserve and showcase the Samoan culture. And in the U.S. Virgin Islands, my office supported the design and will be constructed Salt River Bay Marine Research and Education Center. I tried to be as busy as an assistant secretary could possibly be, and I traveled to as many places as I possibly could to demonstrate the high level of engagement with leaders in our island communities. As a fellow islander, I understood the importance of paying respect in a Chamorro way, and I can only hope that my 4 years of traveling to nearly every island is appreciated in years to come. My passion and tenacity to help my fellow islanders reflects the spirit of my village, my people, my family, and my island. Father Eric Forbes once researched the origin and meaning of the Babauta family name. Indigenous to the Marianas, Babau, he writes, is a word which has fallen into disuse, but it means banner or standard, as in a symbol or a coat of arms, and that the homeland of the Babautas is both agate and molested. So we are a southern family, rich in heritage, strong in spirit, and proud Chamorros. And if my surname is meant as a banner or symbol, I can only wish that my aggressiveness, tenure, and agenda in office provides a baseline for which others can be guided, a standard course of action, a policy to be expanded and surpassed. Since I arrived on Guam, I've spoken to a few classes here at the university, mainly about the responsibilities of citizenship and what that might mean in terms of being a citizen and a resident of Guam. I shared that a few years ago, I spoke to a group of newly sworn in U.S. citizens here on Guam. I was invited by Judge Diego Gabriel. I asked the newly sworn in citizens to reflect on what their recent achievement means, not only to them and to their new country, but also to the island they now call home. Agate has a reputation of being a tougher village than most, one with a fighting spirit, one where if you're not from Agate and you're walking through the village, you might just get a "What's coming from a backyard or from one of the boys at the round table. Now some may think that's a prelude to a scuffle, but as an Agate boy, I can tell you that all we want to do is be helpful. You might be assistants fighting the Sublime House or Kin's needs at home. Either way, you're being asked who you are. So I ask the new citizens, who are you now as a resident of Guam? Will you be active in the community? Will you adopt our culture, appreciate our language, learn our history, fight for what is right? Will you take on the challenges of making this island a better place? Otsiha. It's really a question that we should all reflect upon, regardless of how long we've lived here and to where our allegiances are. What are we doing to preserve this special place? What are you doing to make your tiny village on a small island in a big ocean a better place? Over the past 4 years, I had the chance to not only make Guam a better place, but to take action in other island communities and make them better too. I was proud to have the leadership role in changing policy and taking a new course of action by the federal government and how it views and assists our fellow islanders. My wish is that I carried myself in a way that was reflective of my upbringing and showcased not only the aggressiveness of being an Aggie boy, but the respect of my culture and people. I'm often asked nowadays if I'm okay since resigning from office. Well, I am. I'm from Aggie. I was reminded, however, that no matter how much time you spend in Washington, it can be a tough town. I recall Mr. Underwood once saying that one of the ways to be a part of success is to walk with the parade. Get in line, get with the group, and walk forward. Yet at the same time, one also needs to understand that there's a time to walk away. For me, a change from one term to the next was my opportunity to move on to the next chapter in my life. Feeling that I had made a difference, and hopefully, through my actions, have inspired others for a life of public service and have a professional passion for our islands. Sometimes life gives you lemons, and you make lemonade. I take those same lemons. I add chicken, salt, doni, and coconut, and I make kelp. Last week, the world lost one of its greatest and most inspiring leaders, Nelson Mandela. And over the course of last week, every newspaper you picked up or channel you flipped through, individuals globally are remembering and honoring a man that epitomized public service and sacrifice. A few days ago, I came across an interesting piece in the Huffington Post, written by Simon Sinek, on what leaders could learn about Mandela's selflessness and sacrifice. Simon Sinek has written and talked extensively about what distinguishes a leader from ordinary people, and his take is a unique one. He writes, "Leadership is a service, and service comes with sacrifice. The sacrifices one person is willing to make for the good of others can take many forms. The giving of one's time and energy is certainly a sacrifice, and unlike money, time and energy are non-redeemable. Once we spend it, there is no getting it back. The willingness to sacrifice one's own interests or comfort so that others may advance or be protected is another example. Like a parent who feeds their child before themselves, the willingness to put the interests of others first is a sure sign of leadership. But perhaps the single most powerful sacrifice, the one sacrifice that is core to all great leaders, is the willingness to sacrifice their authority. In physics, power is defined as the transfer of energy. In a light bulb, for example, electricity is transferred into light and heat. A 100-watt light bulb is more powerful than a 60-watt light bulb because there is more energy transferred. The same is true in leadership. It is a leader's ability to transfer their authority to others that actually gives them their power. In a command and control structure, authority is hoarded at the top. This may be good for the short term, and it may be good for the few people in key positions, but ultimately, the organization will suffer in time. When authority is kept at the top, it is more likely that factions will emerge and compete for favor rather than work together for the good of the whole. Whereas in contrast, a leader that distributes their authority empowers their people to take responsibility to advance the group's interests. It In organizations like these, information is shared, mistakes aren't hidden, and innovation thrives. When our leaders give us the authority to make decisions, we feel inspired to make our own sacrifices to see their visions advance. I think this perfectly summarizes Mandela's distinct understanding of his role in society, and it is an opportunity, especially for future leaders, policymakers, and implementers in this room, to reflect on the type of changing force you want to be, what kind of vision you want to lay out for Guam and the region. Mandela famously stated once that, quote, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Our Micronesian ancestors laid the groundwork. Your leaders have carried out that tradition, and you are choosing this institution to educate yourselves, has equipped all of the students with the necessary wealth of knowledge to go forward. I will always be grateful for the support of my fellow islanders and my family for the last 15 years of working in D.C. to create, establish, and prioritize a policy and course of action that defines my life's work and passion. Being here today, I am proud, I'm optimistic, and most importantly, inspired by you, the generations that will lead and solidify and further carry out a vision of prosperity for our island and for our region and for our people. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
At this time, I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Okay, let's go home.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bernie Fraser, and I'm with Guam Incorporated, and I'm also the chairperson for Bazauta Incorporated, our umbrella organization for nonprofit organizations on Guam. I would like to thank the Assistant Secretary for the work he did with really inspiring a lot of our nonprofit organizations and working with us not just on Guam, but in all of Micronesia and American Samoa to get us together and so that we can work together and really build our capacities in our communities to better serve our communities, our individual communities. And Tony, I want you to know, Agaboy, that we are carrying on and going really strong, and the White House Initiative will be out here in March and April for our regional summit. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
That was from you. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful talk and discussion. You were in Washington, D.C. for many years, and I was just curious, every U.S. state and territory struggles with Washington, D.C. Every one of them do. What do you think Guam needs to do differently or better in order to maximize our federal relationship?
It's a great question. I think from my experience, where, just comparing U.S. territory, and we can lump in the states too if you'd like to, but one of the things that I see that's missing, and I don't say this just because I'm in the private sector now, but there really is more of a concerted effort from other jurisdictions to bring people to help open doors and tell their story or discuss their issue. Give you an example. Puerto Rico, for example, they have every year or every time a governor comes in, they hire literally an army of consultants. Some are former members of Congress, some are former staff. When they hire firms, they literally have an army that work on a whole host of issues: pharmaceuticals, the Guam issue, their own political status. They have people out there. We do a fantastic effort here in Guam in having a Team Guam approach and getting the influence of not only the Congresswoman, but the influence of whoever sits in our chair as governor, Governor Talbot's been doing a great job when he goes back there to DC. He's out there right now, as a matter of fact. But those efforts, I think, only get you so far. There are clearly other things that states and probably more states and really Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, they're probably the ones that do the most in terms of getting additional people on board to be able to talk to members of Congress. There are a whole bunch of moving parts, and you don't know which levers that you can pull. But others may know how to pull those levers and open those doors and get a little bit more momentum, or at the very least, understanding of your issues and removing obstacles. Hope it helps.
Any other questions?
We can talk about anything except for my television recipe.
Tony, one of the accomplishments that you failed to mention in the thing, your list of accomplishments was the work that you did with the judiciary, and we're of course very grateful for assisting us with our new case management system. I'll call it the Justice Unified Economic System, WES, for your acronyms. But you and I have talked on numerous occasions about sort of your vision for cross-jurisdictional cooperation, particularly not only with the executive and legislative, but with the judiciary. And I think it'd be helpful if you shared some of those thoughts and your vision with the audience.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, we have had many conversations, an ongoing conversation with the judiciary. From my perspective, working on this issue of the effects of migration on the U.S. jurisdictions, you have the executives who have all gathered together under the umbrella of the Micronesian chiefs, and they are working together and having one voice in terms, working to create one voice in terms of being able to express the impacts of FAS migration, and then go to DC and put forth that argument. You have a very similar effort being led by Judy Wonpat, Speaker Wonpat, through the Association of Pacific Island Legislators. She is working through APIL to try to create an initiative and really interest from the private sector in offering and establishing a system of universal health care that can be applied to the FAS, so that FAS citizens, when they leave, at the very least, they leave the FAS and reside in other U.S. jurisdictions with health insurance, which often they don't right now. There's not that sort of requirement. The judiciary, of course, is equally affected by FAS migration in terms of its caseload and other things that it needs to deal with going down to law enforcement. But the judiciary hasn't spoken with one voice, and I think that there's a very powerful and educated message that the judicial branch can put forth if they're able to not just work amongst themselves on law, but really take the opportunity and work with their colleagues, all the other chief justices in the various jurisdictions of the FAS and the other U.S. territories, and speak with one voice and speak about what's needed to be able to address those issues in the judiciary. But more importantly, perhaps there's a way to find better solutions back in the FAS. There's a lot of talk about the number of prisoners incarcerated here in Guam and the percentage of who make up the FAS, make up FAS citizenry, and why don't we just send them back to the FAS? Seems simple. All the answers are pretty simple. Problem is, one, I don't think they have facilities in the FAS to be able to send prisoners back there and to be able to keep their community safe as well. And two, the problem with extradition is that when someone commits a crime in your community and they're supposed to be found guilty of committing that crime, you're supposed to serve their time in that community, make amends to that community. And I think for some of the more egregious crimes, you want to ensure that that people who were affected feel that justice has been served, and that there's not an effort just to send someone away and then they're enjoying another island without having to pay the price to the community. Thank you.
You know, this, let me just kind of, not to make this question seem like insider Washington baseball, but, you know, the passing of Senator Inouye, and then you have the, you know, the changes that are being made and the way that money is now being appropriated through Congress, and how that's done is going through enormous changes. So what does that mean for insular areas that are seeking funding for different projects? Because you know, Senator Inouye was in a way, you know, I mean, he was in a way our go-to guy because he was a master of the Senate appropriation process. But even if he were alive now, I don't know that it would make that much difference.
Very difficult.
Yeah. So given those things, what do you see happening, or what would be your best advice to insular areas on how to work that?
That's a very tough question. I mean, Mr. Underwood had it exactly right. You know, for many years, for decades, Senator Inouye was, and other members of the Hawaii delegation were champions of our causes, and really political forces within Congress where you could go and get things done. But several things have affected that now. There's no more earmarks in Congress, and there is, and for any program that you establish, you have to offset that within the budget. So if you're going to create a program worth $5 million, you got to go find $5 million someplace else in order to pay for that program. Well, there's all existing programs, so you're taking a pot of money away from something that someone else cares about, and very likely someone who cares about that is a voting member of Congress, both in the House and then they have their influence in the Senate. This is a very difficult question that you asked. I don't know that there's one easy answer that is known in order to address that. Clearly, I think you would need the support of the administration. I mean, we did things in Congress where not necessarily the administration supported it, but we could get enough people, or you could get enough your members or your colleagues to support it and get it established, or we put some language in. You can't do that anymore, obviously, because of the rules of the House when it comes to appropriations, but I think really getting the administration on board, and I'm very happy and pleased that the President nominated another Islander to fill the seat, Ms. Kiana, and I think we should all be looking forward to her leadership. She's extremely familiar with all of our issues. Formerly was Mr. Underwood's chief of staff, so yet another one from the ranks of the Underwood staff representing to higher political positions. But I think getting that support from the administration and having try to be included in the president's budget is probably key to any new programs. To try to do it piecemeal, can't do it with standalone legislation. It's just very hard to do it in the congressional side. Not impossible, but very, very hard to do it.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'd like to make a presentation. Happy Babauta.
Well, thank you for giving us all the answers, Tony. I just wanted to, of course, express our own gratitude for things that have occurred here at the University of Guam as a result of your assistance. And also, you know, just in general, for the island as well as for all of the insular areas. And I'm so glad that Chief Justice is here to point that out. I'm so glad that Bernie's here from the nonprofit sector to point out that the range of your activities was you know, far-flung. It wasn't just, you know, trying to help out educational institutions or governors or legislatures, that you were really thinking holistically about your home island as well as other home islands. So we have a little token of appreciation for being our 21st speaker in the presidential lecture series. We hope that you'll put this in a place of honor.
Thank you very much.
this concludes the 21st presidential legislature.